Proverbs speaks of wisdom, words that guide the heart and steady the hand. It reminds us that wealth is fleeting, but wisdom endures. Generosity enriches the soul, and stewardship honors the Lord. From the dangers of greed to the blessings of giving, these ancient truths illuminate a path of freedom and purpose. This is MoneyWise, discovering God's wisdom for every penny, every choice, every heart.
Good to see you. Good to have you here in the room. Those of you joining us online, thank you for being with us and worshiping together with us today. If you're fairly new to Cornwall, like in the last 3 or 4 weeks, my name is Bob. I am one of the pastors here. I haven't been up here for a bit, but it's been great having a couple of weeks off. I was able to spend a day with our high school students up at Mount Baker at their retreat a few weeks ago. Was able to spend a weekend with our Skagit campus a few weeks ago. It was great. And last weekend, I had the wonderful privilege and opportunity to go back to my home church that I was brought up in, the church that my dad pastored for almost 30 years, and to preach there. We moved there when I was 7. I stayed at that church until I graduated from college at 22. So for 15 years, this was my home church. And to be able to go back and see new people, but also some of the people that have known me from ever. I was called Bobby more last weekend than I've been called that in 2 or 3 years around here, because that's what they knew me as. And it was just so much fun to be with them. And the amount of makeup and rouge and lipstick that I had on my shoulder here from hugging these sweet little old ladies. This one gal, I mean, she had some serious red lips. After she hugged me, she said, "Oh, sorry." I said, "We're going to have to talk to my wife about that. You're going to have to explain that one right there." But it was so great being with these people that, I mean, they knew me when I was 7. I thought they were old then. They're still alive. But there's something about just having gone through the experiences of life and the years and the mistakes and the victories and all that, you know, the wisdom that you get from that of just marking calendar time, just being alive, you gain some experiences and you gain some wisdom. Several years back, there was a book that was published. The author's name is Dr. Carl Pillemer. He's a professor at Cornell University. The title of the book is 30 Lessons on Living, and the subtitle is Tried and True Advice from the Wisest Americans. And the research that he did in preparation for these 30 lessons on living was that he interviewed 1,000 people who were in, and we'll just use this phrase, the last quarter of their life. Kind of some sunset years, their senior years. They were in their last quarter. And he asked them just questions. And as he interviewed these 1,000 people, he began to synthesize what are some common themes, what are some things that he heard repeated over and over again on all areas of life, of work and relationships and health and all kinds of things. But one of the things he observed was that in the 1,000 people, as they looked back on their life, not one of them said, "I really wish I would have made more money." And maybe it's a matter of perspective of after you get through it all, but it's found it interesting that here are these people they're coming up towards the last quarter saying, yeah, there's maybe some things I regret in life, but I never would want to go back and try to make more money. And that's such a driving factor and such a driving force for us. We put so much time and energy and effort towards making more money, getting more money, and yet maybe there's some wisdom from those who have gone before us to say, you know what, maybe that's not the highest priority at all. So we're in this series called MoneyWise because we want to be wise about things like with money. And Pastor Steve kicked this series off last week. In his sermon, he asked the question, how many of you have ever done dumb things with money? Now, I wasn't in the room, but I watched online, and from at least the service that I watched, he implied that a lot of you raised your hands, which means you really need this series. I mean, I raised my hand too. We've all done some dumb things with money, but I want to give us the benefit of the doubt. I want to suggest that when we look back and say, oh, that was really dumb, oh, I shouldn't have done that, oh, that was stupid. At the time that we made that decision, it made perfect sense to us. Maybe it was the age we were or the stage in life. Maybe it was the friends that we had. Maybe it was our values. Maybe it was what was a priority for us. Maybe it was pressure from family or from a salesman or maybe our internal salesman. But at the moment, it seemed like it made perfect sense. Like, yes, this would be a good decision for me to do this. It was later in looking back that we said, that wasn't so smart. Now, the writer of Proverbs, he says the same thing, but he isn't as kind as I am. In Proverbs chapter 12, verse 15, he says it this way: the way of a fool seems right to him, but a wise man listens to advice. That maybe we would look back and say, well, that was a foolish thing. He says, no, you were a fool. But it seemed right at the time. But a wise person will actually listen to advice. You know, the difference between a fool, a smart person, and a wise person is a fool will just keep doing the same thing over and over again. That's that definition for insanity. Do the same thing and expect different results. The internal junior high boy in me that has never grown up loves that verse out of Proverbs where Solomon writes these words: as a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool repeats his folly. I've always loved it. It's so graphic. This dog goes over and eats whatever and then starts, doing the dog. I won't go into all of it. But then he like has a second helping on the first one, and he goes back to it again, and he says that's what a fool does, like does the same thing over and over again. Now, a smart person like us, we may have done some dumb things with our money, but we learn our lesson. We're like, yeah, that was dumb, but I'm not doing that again. I've learned a lesson. A wise person learns from someone else's mistakes so that we don't have to make all the mistakes, to observe others, to hear from them. A wise person listens to advice. In order to be wise, though, you have to have a spirit of humility. You have to have a desire to do things differently. You have to have a trust in someone who's sharing that. You have to have a teachable spirit in any area of life, and especially for this series, in the area of our finances. Now, I want to just tell you right now what some of you are thinking, and it's okay. I'm telling you this. Some of you are sitting here right now saying, preacher, don't tell me what to do with my money. It's my money. I made it. I can spend it like I want. You're absolutely right. I agree with you 100%. And some of you are saying, and besides, you're a preacher. We've heard about you guys. Y'all want private jets and big mansions. Okay, don't lump me in with them. I don't have enough hair to do anyway. So I get that. So today I want to say, don't listen to my advice. I'm not going to give you my advice. I want you to listen to the advice of someone who's far wiser than any of us. We decided in this series that we would base it almost exclusively on the book of Proverbs. Now, Scripture, from Old Testament to New Testament, and Jesus himself talks a lot about money and possessions and things, but we wanted to focus in on Proverbs because the writer of Proverbs says a lot of things about a lot of things in life, and especially about money. And it was written by the wisest and wealthiest man who ever lived. So if you ever want some financial advice, you ought to go to someone who's extremely wealthy and extremely wise. He can probably tell you a few things. And that's Solomon. He is attributed with authoring the majority of the book of Proverbs. Now, before we get into that, let me back up and remind you why we even have the book of Proverbs and why we even have Solomon. Because his story is really an absolute front row seat picture of the grace and goodness of God to bring redemption of beauty out of ashes. The reason that Solomon even exists is because God is so good. Because God can take something that is broken and sinful and evil and bring it about for his glory. That's the grace of our God. You see, in Matthew chapter 1, where there's this genealogy of all these people, it says that Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of King David, and King David was the father of Solomon, and there's a parenthetical footnote, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Did you have to bring that up again? That was this dark chapter when there was lust and adultery and deceit and cover-up and murder. I mean, it was just sinful and evil and wrong and broken. And while there were consequences, God was saying, yes, that's horrible, but I can still redeem even the worst situation, which gives all of us hope. And from this comes Solomon. Solomon, whose dad was King David, whose mother was Bathsheba. Solomon was next in line for the throne of Israel. King David, his dad, was the king of Israel when it was at its pinnacle. I mean, economically and politically and military. I mean, it was the apex of Israel when King David was on the throne. Most scholars believe that David died when he was about 70 years old. And so the throne went to his son, Solomon, who at the time was about 20 years old. And it says that he took over and he was mostly pretty godly. There were a couple of areas that needed some adjustment. But when he was 20 years old, the Lord came to him in a dream and basically said this: ask me whatever you would have me to give you. Basically a blank check. Now that's an interesting question. That would be a great question to discuss in your small group. If God came to you saying, ask whatever you want, blank check, and not like 3 more wishes. Don't do that one. But if you ask whatever you want, what would you ask for? And after you discuss that, roll the clock back for most of us, not all of us, but roll the clock back. How would you have answered that question when you were 20? Because my guess is, at least for me, how I answer that question today is far different than how I would have answered it in 1983 when I was a 20-year-old brat. Because in 1983, if God would have come to me and said, Bob, ask whatever you want and I will give it to you, it would probably entail a Camaro Z28, the ability to grow a mustache, and a beautiful supermodel. Now, I would ask those things not because I was so shallow. No, actually, it would be because I was so shallow. It would just be like for that. But I would answer that differently. Well, Solomon is a 20-year-old man, and he's asked this question: Solomon, what would you have me give to you? And he feels the weight and the responsibility of running this kingdom. And he knows that there's going to be his siblings that will try to tell him what to do. His mom will try to tell him what to do. His dad's advisors will try to tell him what to do. His friends that are his new advisors will try to tell him what to do. The people of the kingdom will try to tell him what to do. And he says to God, I'm young. I don't have a clue what I'm doing. What I really need is a discerning heart and to be able to know right from wrong so that I can be a part of this kingdom of yours. And God was so pleased that he didn't actually ask for the Camaro or whatever the equivalent would have been for him. So pleased that that was his request that God says, I will give you a wise and discerning heart. And because you didn't ask for all that other stuff, I'm going to bonus you a few extras. I'm going to make you wealthier than anyone has ever been. And I'm going to give you wisdom beyond what anyone has ever had. Now, some of you hear that story and say, dude, I've been praying wrong. I got to pray for wisdom, then I get the Camaro thrown in. That's not the point of the story. But Solomon has given all of this wealth, he's given all this honor, and he's given wisdom from God, not just his own thinking, wisdom from God. So much so that he actually writes some things. 3 of the things that he wrote find their way into our scriptures, 3 of the books that he wrote in scripture. And interestingly enough, the genre of scripture is referred to as wisdom literature. He wrote the Song of Solomon or the Song of Songs, and most people believe that he wrote that when he was young. And if you've ever read it, you can see that. And he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, and most believe he wrote that when he was older. And if you've ever read that, that makes perfect sense too. And the majority of the book of Proverbs is attributed to him. And he writes this book that has all of these little sayings, these little axioms, these little pieces of wisdom. Now, let me just say one more thing before we get too far into this, because some people have misunderstood this. A proverb is not a promise. It's not a promise. It's a general principle of how this is how it usually works. There's always going to be an exception. It's not a promise. It's a principle. This is how life works. And Solomon writes these things, and sometimes, and again, covers every area of life, relationships, work, ethics, sexuality, just covers the whole gamut. And money is one of the things that he covers. There are so many verses in Proverbs on money and possessions, finance. We will not cover them all in this short series at all, not even close. But we're going to look at some, and sometimes they're just his observation. He just spots things and he writes down, this is how life works. For instance, in Proverbs chapter 13, he says, one man pretends to be rich, yet has nothing. Another pretends to be poor, yet has great wealth. Now, the word pretend kind of throws us a little bit because it sounds like it's an intentional deception. But you could change out that word pretends with appears. One man appears to be rich but has nothing. The other one appears to be poor but has incredible wealth. And I don't know if you've ever seen or experienced that. You see someone, you see what they drive, you see where they live, you see what they wear, and you make the assumption, all appearances are, these people are loaded, and they might be. Or They might be leveraged so far to the hill that they cannot even make payments, and it's a shell game every month we'll make this payment, and before this one's due, and we'll make this payment, we'll take from here, rob Peter, and we're trying all this, and there's not an inch of margin. If there was a crisis in their life, they would be sunk. And they have no margin at all. They look wealthy, but maybe they're not at all. It says, and the converse is true as well. There may be some people who are saying, yeah, they seem to be doing okay, middle of the road, kind of middle-class folks. Years ago, there was a book called The Millionaire Next Door. The book was based on a study of, again, this was probably 20 years ago, everyone who was a millionaire in the United States. And one of the findings in this book was the vast majority of millionaires in the United States do not live the lifestyles of the rich and famous. They don't have yachts. They're not driving Lamborghinis. They don't have these mansions. You would never know. They're like the people next door. I don't know if you've ever heard of Warren Buffett. Guy's done okay. Called the Oracle of Omaha. He's the CEO of Berkshire. There we go. His net worth is $146 billion. Not million, $billion. Warren Buffett still lives in the house he bought in 1958 for $31,500. The billionaire next door. Sam Walton, the father of Walmart, before he died, billions and billions and billions of dollars, still drove his old pickup truck. And Solomon just says, it's not always like it looks. He's got all these different observations and all this wisdom about things with our finances. So today I want to say, today's sermon is extremely practical. Very practical, very biblical, but very practical. If you walk out of here saying, wow, that church didn't take me really deep theologically, today you're absolutely right. I agree with you. This one's going to be very, very practical. We're going to look at this. Look at what this wisest, wealthiest man had to say about these things. And what we're going to do is we're going to be chasing not the American dream, but the Formicidae dream. The wisdom of the Formicidae that has been around for millennia. The Formicidae that has served people well on every continent save one. And has helped millions, even billions. So maybe you've never heard of the Formicidae dream. Let me help you with this. In Proverbs chapter 30, it says this, verse 24, 4 things on earth are small, yet they are extremely wise. Now here's where we have to have the humility. Are we willing to learn? Can we get something that is wise regardless of the size? That's a little poem that I just wrote. Because he said there's some things that are really, really small, but disproportionate to their size, they're extremely wise. And he lists 4. We're going to look at the first one. And he says, here's the first one, ants. Ants. A Formicidae is a scientific term for a family of insects that includes all ants. And so here we are. We're going to look at, Solomon says, let's look at the wisdom of the ants. Isn't it interesting how often in the financial realm we use animals as kind of metaphors? I don't know if you've ever thought about this. On Wall Street, they talk about a bull market or a bear market. You may hear about something that's a cash cow or a goose that lays the golden egg. The eager beaver gets the lion's share, ends up as the top dog with the fat cats. Okay, so you got all these animals. You squirrel stuff away. That way you'll have a nest egg. Or you don't and you end up with a goose egg. Someone told me years ago, whether you end up with a nest egg or a goose egg, it depends on which chick you marry. But regardless of that, we're going to look at what he says is the Formicidae wisdom, and it's the wisdom of the ant. So we're going to Proverbs chapter 6. I want to read through about 6 verses, and then we're going to work our way through some broad brush stroke, some big principles for all of us. Here we go. Proverbs chapter 6, verse 6. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Isn't sluggard a great word? I don't know that you should ever call anyone that, but what a great word, you sluggard. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a bandit, and scarcity like an armed man. And he starts off with this contrast of these two animals and these two, I suppose, characteristics of these. He says, go to the ant, you sluggard. Now, while he's talking about a person or people in general, the root of sluggard is the word slug. So we're talking about that, the characteristics of a slug. He says, you've got some of these characteristics. I want you to learn from a different animal. I want you to go to the ant. Well, let's just talk about the contrast of these two animals. And in case you're not really sure what we're talking about, I'll give you some pictures because maybe you've never seen these before. We have a lot of slugs here in the Northwest. I mean, that's just kind of, they're everywhere, this terrestrial gastropod mollusk. And here are these slugs. The interesting thing about slugs is most people don't keep them as pets. Most people try to get rid of them. And they're not really hard to catch. You don't say, oh, you know what happened to me this week? I caught a slug. I mean, you don't sneak up on slugs. You can give them a 3-hour warning and still get them. I mean, they are slow-moving animals. And many of you have put salt. I'm not asking for a show of hands. Many of you have poured salt on slugs or you put out slug bait. There's another remedy for taking care of slugs, I've heard. Slugs love beer. So if you pour beer in a pie tin and put it out in your garden at slug season, in the morning you'll come out, it will be filled with these smiling, half eyelids down, drunk, dead slugs. There was a big slug kegger in the garden, and they all went into the pan, and they drowned, and maybe a neighbor boy as well. But they're all there in this beer. And not only that, they all left this slime trail on the way there. Fact that you may not be aware of, a slug's slime trail is one of the way it attracts a mate. Won't work for you, I'm telling you. But that's the case. The University of California, Santa Cruz has as their mascot the banana slugs. That's got to be a strong recruiting element for young guys. Come to the school where we elevate slow-moving, beer-loving slime bags. Come be one of us. And he says, look at the ant. Look at the Formicidae. Look at these things. Ants exist on every continent save one on our planet. They are on every continent except, and this is so unfortunate, except Antarctica, which is named after them. They're not even there. And it's been estimated by entomologists that for every human on the earth, there's 1 million ants. They're everywhere. They're prolific. And we try to get rid of them. But these little creatures are amazing. One of the strongest, they can carry 50 times their body weight. One of the most brainy animals of all creation. The brain size proportionate to the body size, the ant tops all of them. The size of the ant's brain compared to the rest of its body. And so Solomon comes along and says, listen, you may have some slug-like features, but you can learn great wisdom from these ants. So let's go back to it again. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. I want you to go, I want you to observe, and I want you to learn some things. But the writer of Proverbs knows that the sluggard may not even listen to this advice. He might not even go to the ant. So he kind of says, go, observe, learn, get wise, but you're probably not going to go. So let me tell you what you would have seen had you gone and done what I told you. It says, go and consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer, or no ruler, yet. Not yet like it's going to have one eventually, but despite the fact that it does not have a commander, an overseer, a ruler. And here's what we see. This first lesson of the ant for all of us is to take responsibility. The ant doesn't need a boss to tell it what to do. Doesn't need a spouse to be nagging it. Doesn't need parents to be moaning and complaining about it. Doesn't need anyone else. The ant doesn't have the external motivation. There's just something within it that says, I'm going to take initiative. I'm going to do something here. And it's not dependent. The ant doesn't say, well, this is my parents' responsibility. They need to take care of me. This is my boss's responsibility. This is society's responsibility. This is the government's responsibility. No, the ant says, no, this is my responsibility. I'm going to do this. I'm going to take the initiative. In Proverbs chapter 10, verse 4, it says, lazy hands make a man poor, but diligent hands bring wealth. Lazy hands like a slug, or diligent hands like an ant. You can predict the outcome of those things. He says, so take the initiative. Go get a job. Go back to school. Get the certification. Apply for the promotion. Start the side hustle. But be like an ant. Don't wait around for everybody else to do this for you. He says, see, the ant takes responsibility. It doesn't have anyone telling it what to do, and yet, look what it does. It stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. It doesn't procrastinate. It doesn't wait around. Doesn't wait for a crisis. And that's kind of our second lesson is get a plan. I mean, the ant has this plan. He knows, I'm not going to wait. I'm not going to just live in the moment and just pretend like there's no tomorrow. I've got to think kind of long term. I've got to prepare. I'm not going to procrastinate and wait till winter and then try to figure things out. I know that now, while things are good, I'm going to do some stuff. I'm going to set some things up. I've got a plan so that when things get lean, when it gets cold, when it gets difficult, I'm going to make it through. I've got this plan that I've put into play here. So get a plan for your financial world. In Proverbs 21:5, it says, the plans of the diligent. Diligent means they not only have a plan, but they work the plan. They're actually doing it. The plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty. You want a shortcut? You want to get rich quick? That's not going to work. And yes, you can point out this exception. That's the exception. That's not the way it works. It's when you have the plan and you work that. In Proverbs 13:11, it says, dishonest money dwindles away, but he who gathers money little by little makes it grow. Now, I am not a financial planner, but you talk to any financial planner, anyone who's in wealth management, anyone who's going to help you with investments, they will talk to you about the beauty of compounding interest, of playing the long game, of not trying to do it all in a week or two, but thinking long term. Set it and forget it. Let it just grow. If you have a financial planner or a wealth advisor saying, hey, I got an idea. We're going to swing for the fence. We're going to put it all on red. We're going for it. Leave. That's the worst advice ever. It's just this plan, just systematic. And let it keep growing. When I was in my early 20s, just out of college, first job as a youth pastor at a different church, not making any money. And whenever I would call my dad or go back to see him, my dad always asked me two questions. I mean, like every time, at the end of the conversation, he'd ask me two questions. He'd ask me, when's the last time you changed the oil in your vehicle? That's a perfect dad question. Always ask me, when's the last time you changed the oil in your car? And the other question he would ask is, are you putting money into your retirement fund? At that point, man, I was barely trying to make it through and so much things I wanted to buy but couldn't. And he's like, you've got to start putting money into that retirement fund. Get to at least 11%. Start working towards it. Keep putting in more. When you get a little bit extra, you get a raise, you do something that someone pays you for, you speak at a retreat, you put it into that retirement. He just kept saying, put it into that retirement fund. Trust me on this. Set it and forget it. But get it up to 11%. And he just hit me, change the oil, put it into your retirement, little by little. Have a plan and work that plan. Because there will come a day when I will need that, and it will be there. Now, with this plan, again, there's a lot of different plans, and I can tell you all the specifics, but in this plan, there's a couple things that the writer of Proverbs makes pretty clear that would be a good advice to listen to. And you may not agree with all of this, but I want to just put it out there. Not my words, but Proverbs. One is to avoid debt. And when I'm talking about debt, I'm talking about consumer debt. If it's an appreciable asset, like a mortgage or something on a house like that's going to appreciate, that's a different story. But to avoid debt, let me just make this really clear. The Bible does not forbid debt. It doesn't say, thou shalt not take out a loan. The Bible never says that. Never says, if you take out a loan, you sin. Never says that. But the Bible talks a lot about debt, and every time it talks about debt, it comes with a warning. It comes with an awareness of the dangers. It comes with the pitfalls. It's always negative. Whenever the Bible references debt, it's always negative. It doesn't forbid it, but it's never a positive thing. Some of you, and I'm not picking on you, have gotten to this point where you say, yes, I'm in debt, and I always will be, and I'm okay with that. And you can live that way. You don't have to, but you can. I tell you, in preparing this sermon, one of the things that I worked really hard at was not coming in here with a bunch of statistics of the American person. Because you get so many statistics, it becomes white noise, and it doesn't really that. However, there is a couple that I just want to tell you about debt and specific credit card debt. Again, I've got a credit card, so hear me all the way out. And I also know that depending on which website you go to, you're going to get different statistics. In one of the websites that I went to, it says that in America, the average person has, or the American has an average of 3.84 credit cards. Okay, fine, got your Visa, got American Express, got your gas card, whatever it is, 3.84. And this one, again, I think this one would have been a little higher because other ones pointed it lower, that the average credit card debt that the American holds is $10,563. Now, some of you are saying, serious? And some of you are saying, I wish. That's the average. I think it's a little high, but some of you might say, okay, you know what, Bob? I got convicted today. We're not putting anything else on the credit card. We are average. Some of you are like, we're above average, regardless. Not a time to be proud of that one. But we've got $10,500 on our credit card. We're not putting anything else on it. We're just going to make minimum payments till it's all paid off. It will take you 22 years of minimum payments to pay that off. And by the time you pay off $10,500, you will have paid $29,000. Credit card interest is ridiculous. Now, listen, you can live that way. It's not a sin. I just don't think it's wise. And I want to tell you, I lived that way for a while. And it was awful. So what I'm getting ready to share with you is not because I've always gotten it right, because I haven't. And I've shared that story multiple times in the past, so I won't go into it again. But I've been there. I've been there where I'm doing this timing thing of I know I get paid on this day, so I'll put a check in the mail for this bill on this day, hoping that the U.S. Postal Service doesn't all of a sudden get efficient and it gets there before I actually get paid, and then I'm going to pay this one because they're not asking to turn something off because this one is, and so I'm going to move this around. I've done that. I've been there where the credit card was denied in front of my friends and it was embarrassing. I've been there where I had a legitimate need and had no means by which to pay for that. I've been there. I'm just telling you. I've been the fool. But I learned some lessons. My wife and I, Thursday, we celebrated our 25th anniversary. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, she's in debt to me for that, so just kidding, it's the other way around. We made a decision early on, before we were married, that we would never put anything on a credit card that we couldn't pay off that month. Just a decision we made. I'm not saying you have to. It's a decision we made. If there was something that we wanted or thought we needed, we could put it on the credit card, but we knew we couldn't pay it off that month, well, I'll just have to wait. And having celebrated 25 years, and I say this not like proud, but we've not paid one penny of credit card interest in the entire 25 years. That's a choice that we made. I'm not saying you have to, but I'm saying you can. Because why would I want to flush thousands of dollars down interest on something that has already been used, consumed, or is now broken and not yet paid for? It just doesn't make sense to me. I used to live that way. And while I'm at it, tell you one more, a decision that we made. And again, some of you say, well, we're not going to do that. That's fine. Like, we can't do that. That's fine. We don't take out loans for vehicles. That's our choice. And there's ways that we've had to adjust in order to do that. The last time I took out a loan for a vehicle was in 1988. I bought a blue Jeep Cherokee. And that was the season where I got myself in so deep that it was just so horrible. And I thought, if I ever get out of this hole, I'm never going back again. And when I got out of that hole and dug out with some help from my parents and some others, a lot of humiliation, and I finally got that Jeep paid off, someone gave me a word of sage wisdom. Keep making the payment on your Jeep even though it's paid off. Make the payment to yourself. put it into an account, and don't touch it. You just keep making that payment. And I did. And I drove that blue Jeep Cherokee, literally, this is not metaphor, this is not hyperbole, until the wheels fell off. The last time I drove it from the church on the guide to my house on Orleans Street, the bearings were smoking and screeching. Women were hiding their little children. Thank God, when I got to my house on Orleans, the front wheels were doing this. So last time I drove it, and I sold it. And I bought a Nissan Pathfinder, and I paid cash for it because I'd been making payments to myself. And I'll drive a car far longer than most, easily 10 years. So I bought that Nissan Pathfinder. Finally, when it had 215,000 miles on it, my wife said, "Would you sell that and get something else?" That's a good wife. And I had been making payments to myself for years. So I bought my blue Ford FJ Cruiser. And I drove that thing for over 10 years till it had 228,000 miles. Some of you are still waving at me. It's not me anymore. I'm not in the blue FJ anymore. Stop. Although people think you're friendly. Until a little over a year ago when I bought my 4Runner and I paid cash because I had been making payments. And you know what? I'm making payments for myself to buy whatever a 73-year-old man will buy. Because I don't know what it'll be, but it will be paid for. Now, that's just a choice that we've made. And again, somebody say, "Well, I don't want to drive a car." That's fine. I'm just telling you, these are the choices we've made and the freedom that we have and the lack of worry and anxiety about how are we going to pay this Visa bill, how are we going to make this car payment. We just don't have those worries at all. We used to. Not only that freedom, the writer of Proverbs says this, Proverbs 22:7. The rich rule over the poor, but this is most important. The borrower is servant to the lender. You say, "Well, look what I bought. Look what I own." Yeah. You have it in your possession, but you stop making those payments, you'll see how much you own. Someone will come and take that back from you. Why be under this kind of slavery? Why be in bondage to the lender? There's another part of this, having a plan, and that is to live frugally. Yeah, I mentioned that book, The Millionaire Next Door, and when they looked at all these different millionaires in the United States, the number one common denominator across the board is that they all lived below their means. Not just within their means, below their means. You can either live beyond your means, which is kind of the American way. Spend all you have and then get credit and go beyond that. Spend, tomorrow's cash today and hope that it comes through. Or you can live beneath your means. The beauty of that is that there will be margin so that when there's some unforeseen crisis that happens, when there's a repair that needs to be done, when there's something that needs to be replaced, when there's some bill that comes along, that there's margin, and it's no one enjoys these things, but to say, you know what, I don't have to worry, I can cover this. Or when there's some opportunity that comes along, some great opportunity to enjoy this, but we don't have the margin for it. Some opportunity to bless this, some opportunity to be, generous, but we just don't have the bandwidth for that. I love this verse out of Proverbs 21, where it says, "In the house of the wise are stores of choice food and oil." There's extra, there's margin, there's abundance. But a foolish man devours all he has. I'm just going to say it again. I've lived on both sides of that equation, and one of them is far better than the other. To be able to have that margin. And I never want to go back to the way I used to be. Now, you watched Carl's video earlier in the service, and he references a very simple formula that we've taught around here for years. It's called the 10-10-80 plan. It's to honor God with that first 10%. We'll talk more about that next week. It's to save the next 10% and then to live on that 80%. And yeah, you might have to scale back, and there's some things you might not be able to have anymore, like eggs. But there's some other things that you'll be able to just say, you know what, we're going to put our standard of living at a little bit lower. We're just going to kind of back it off just a little bit and live under our means. So back to the sluggard. Proverbs 6:9 says, "How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep?" Are you going to do anything with this? And what's great is that Solomon says, not only did I learn some lessons from the ant, I actually learned some lessons from the sluggard of what not to do. Because later in the book, in chapter 24, he says, I went to the sluggard's house. I went to his fields. I saw the condition. Chaos, overgrown, weeds, fences all destroyed in dismay. Proverbs 24:32, he says, I applied my heart to what I observed. So that's the wise. He said, I see some things, I learned some lessons. And I learned a lesson from what I saw. And he repeats this line again. The laziness, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a bandit, and scarcity like an armed man. He says, I learned something from the sluggard. Take action. Take action. Like, get started on this. Because some of you right now are saying, yeah, I want to do some of that one of these days. When? When I get out of college, or when I get a job, or when I get married, or when I get this. No, you can start now in small ways. I don't know what your next step is, but don't be a sluggard. Maybe the next step is just a conversation you need to have with your spouse. Maybe the next step is saying, you know what, I'm not going to put anything else on that credit card. Maybe the next step is, I'm actually going to sell this because I don't want to keep making payments, and I'm going to settle for one less. Maybe it's like, I'm going to quit trying to look like I'm at this level. What's the word I'm trying to portray? Is that it? Project, portray, pretend that I'm at this level. I'm just going to act my wage. I'm going to, come down a little bit lower than that. But don't just talk about it. Last verse, Proverbs 14:23. All hard work brings a profit, but mere talk only leads to poverty. It's a lot easier to spend all you've got than to save. It's a lot easier to go into debt and to get it into credit than to say no and delay that gratification. It's a lot easier to not do anything than to take initiative. But he says it's the hard work. It's the diligent hands. It's being like the ant. 8 years ago this month, February of 2017, we offered for the first time here Financial Peace University. And my wife and I took it along with, 100 and some other people we were in there. And it was, all age groups. There were all demographics. There were single people. There were married people. There were divorced people. There were people with kids, empty nesters, across the board. And a powerful Financial Peace University. And I didn't know how everybody took what they heard, but there were a couple people that had shared with me that, hey, we're applying this and it's making a difference. And so 2 of those couples I reached out to 8 years later, and I said, could you give me a statement of your experience from Financial Peace University? The first couple, when they took it, they were 30, 32 years old. They had a 4-year-old son and a 5-month-old son. Young family, young growing family, mortgage, all the stresses. And this is what they said about Financial Peace University. Financial Peace University gave us the practical tools we needed to change our financial trajectory. We went from wondering where our money went every month and feeling always behind to having a plan and being able to save and work toward our financial goals. It also gave us the opportunity to talk about these important topics and become better unified. And they would point back to that class and the things that they learned of changing their whole financial world and even bringing their marriage closer together. At the same class, there was another couple that was maybe 10 years ahead of them, right around 40, 42 years old or so. They had three kids. 2 of them were teenagers, 1 of them was not. But as they were coming into an era of life, and they've got their mortgage and these teenage kids, and there's going to be more cars, and there's going to be insurance, and college is just around the corner. They applied those things that they learned, and this is what they wrote. Financial Peace University was life-altering, no exaggeration. We went from being in debt to learning the skills to change our spending, how to get out of debt, how to save, as well as how to give. Financial Peace University is the foundation of the financial freedom and peace we have today. And it continues to guide the financial decisions we make on a daily basis. Listen, on March 3rd, we're starting another series of Financial Peace University. And for some of you, this is the step you need to take. Just to learn, how do I do this? It's the practical tools. And if you will take those and apply, I think you'll be like these couples. You'll look back years later and say, that was a turning point for us. That brought us the financial peace, the security, the freedom that we experience. It won't happen overnight. It's those diligent, hardworking hands that make a difference. So, I'm not asking you to take my advice. Listen to the advice of the wisest and wealthiest man who ever lived. And the question is this: do you have the humility to gain his wisdom and the wisdom to apply it to your life? Be an ant, not a slug. Let's stand and we'll close in prayer. Father, we thank you for the incredibly practical wisdom of your word. And we thank you that you care not just about our souls and our eternities, but you care about our life and our finances. And you long for us to live in a way that honors you, in a way that is free from the stress, a way that blesses others. So God, I pray that we would take this wisdom and apply it to our lives. Thank you for this time we've had together today to worship, to celebrate baptisms, to hear your truth. May we live it out. Pray in your name. Amen.